Charles and Precious lived in the same compound, their home separated by a small garden. Their families had known each other for years, and the proximity of their houses made them more than just neighbors, they were like extended family. Charles, a curious and spirited 12-year-old, had an infectious laugh and a boundless energy that often left adults shaking their heads in amused exasperation. Precious, an 11-year-old with a vivid imagination, was quieter but equally engaging, her bright eyes always sparkling with ideas and dreams. Their bond had grown naturally over time, forged in the shared spaces of their compound where they played, explored, and dreamed together. Both sets of parents worked long hours at the same bank, a demanding institution that required early departures and late returns. This left the children to their own devices for most of the day. In the mornings, they would wave goodbye to their parents, the echoing sound of car engines marking the beginning of another day of freedom. Charles often spent his mornings tinkering with his mother's phone, downloading games and exploring apps, while Precious immersed herself in drawing or writing stories in her notebook. By the time the afternoon sun cast its golden glow over the compound, the two would come together, eager to share their individual discoveries and creations. Charles loved playing games on his mother's phone, and Precious would often join him. They spent countless hours laughing at funny videos, competing in games, and sometimes even making up their own rules to keep things interesting. Their laughter would ring out across the compound, a cheerful reminder of their innocence and the simple joys of childhood. One day, while scrolling through social media, they stumbled upon a video with a strange title. Intrigued, they clicked on it. The content confused and unsettled them. It was inappropriate for their age, filled with concepts and imagery they didn't understand. Precious was visibly uncomfortable, her usual confidence replaced with unease. Charles, on the other hand, tried to make sense of what they had seen. He kept watching, his curiosity outweighing his discomfort. That night, Charles couldn't stop thinking about the video. It lingered in his mind, a puzzling and somewhat forbidden mystery. The next day at school, he mentioned it to a classmate, hoping for some clarity. The boy laughed and mocked Charles for not knowing about such things, boasting that he had already experienced it. Embarrassed and feeling inadequate, Charles's curiosity deepened. When he returned home, he shared the conversation with Precious. "Let's try it," Charles said nervously, his voice betraying his uncertainty. Precious hesitated, her instincts telling her that it was a bad idea. "I don't think we should." "It's wrong," she replied, her voice firm yet uncertain. But Charles persisted, convincing her to watch the video again to figure out what to do. Eventually, Precious gave in, trusting her friend despite her misgivings. They attempted to imitate what they saw, but it ended in pain and fear for Precious. She began bleeding, and both children panicked. Charles frantically searched online for a solution, his fingers trembling as he typed. They managed to stop the bleeding, but the incident left them shaken. They vowed never to speak of it again. However, Charles's embarrassment and curiosity persisted. Days later, he pressured Precious to try again, promising it wouldn't hurt this time. Precious reluctantly agreed, her trust in Charles outweighing her reservations. Though it hurt less, she still felt uneasy, a gnawing feeling that they were doing something terribly wrong. As the months passed, their secret activity continued. Neither understood the consequences of their actions, their youthful naivety blinding them to the potential dangers. They kept their secret well, their innocent faces betraying nothing of the turmoil beneath. Time moved on, and the seasons changed. Charles and Precious grew older, their bond deepening even as their innocence eroded. They navigated the complexities of adolescence together, sharing their dreams, fears, and secrets. Precious often spoke about wanting to be a teacher, someone who could guide and educate young minds. Charles had ambitions of becoming a pilot, soaring through the skies and exploring the world. Their dreams were bright and full of hope, untainted by the realities of their hidden actions. When Precious turned 17 and Charles 18, life took a drastic turn. Precious began feeling unwell. At first, she dismissed it as a minor illness, attributing her symptoms to stress or fatigue. But as the weeks passed, her condition worsened. She felt nauseous, tired, and unusually emotional. Her mother noticed the changes and decided to take her to the hospital. The doctor's news shocked them both. Precious was pregnant. Her mother was devastated, her mind racing with questions and fears. Demanding to know who was responsible, she pressed Precious for answers. Overwhelmed by guilt and fear, Precious broke down in tears and confessed everything. The revelation stunned both families. Charles's mother couldn't believe her son's involvement. She was furious at her own neglect, blaming herself for not providing proper guidance. Precious's mother, overwhelmed with shame and anger, decided the pregnancy had to be terminated. The abortion was performed, but complications arose afterward. Precious began bleeding heavily that night. Her mother, desperate to save her, planned to take her back to the hospital the next morning. But by dawn, Precious had passed away. The tragedy shattered both families. Charles's mother, fearing retaliation from Precious's grieving mother, sent him to live with his grandmother in a distant village. There, Charles stopped attending school, weighed down by guilt and regret. The vibrant, curious boy he once was had been replaced by a quiet, withdrawn young man. He spent his days helping his grandmother on her farm, finding solace in the simplicity of rural life. Meanwhile, both families grappled with their grief. Precious's mother struggled to cope, often sitting in Precious's room, surrounded by her daughter's belongings. She found an old diary Precious had kept, filled with sketches, stories, and notes about her dreams. The diary was a painful reminder of the bright, loving girl she had lost, but it also fueled her determination to prevent such a tragedy from happening to other families. She began speaking at schools, sharing Precious's story with students and parents alike. She emphasized the importance of open communication, proper supervision, and creating an environment where children felt safe to express themselves. Charles's mother, too, took responsibility for her part in the tragedy. She quit her demanding job and began volunteering at community centers, advocating for parental involvement in children's lives. She often spoke about how small moments of neglect could lead to irreversible consequences. She shared her pain and regret, hoping to inspire other parents to prioritize their children over their careers. As time passed, Charles's thoughts often drifted to the moments they could have sought help. What if they had talked to their parents, their teachers, or any adult they trusted? What if they had been honest about their confusion and fears? The answers to those questions haunted him, filling him with a longing for a second chance that would never come. He often walked to a nearby hill, where he would sit and stare at the horizon, lost in thought. He hoped that by sharing their story, he could prevent others from making the same mistakes. He began writing letters to schools, community centers, and youth groups, detailing his experiences and the lessons he had learned. These letters, though painful to write, became a way for him to honor Precious's memory and ensure her story was not forgotten. The compound where they had grown up was no longer the same. The small garden that had once been their playground now stood as a silent witness to their story. Neighbors often spoke about the two children who had been so full of life and how their tragedy had shaken the entire community. Their story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the importance of guidance, communication, and the consequences of neglect. Over time, both families found ways to channel their grief into action, creating programs and initiatives to support children and parents. Their efforts, though born out of tragedy, brought hope and awareness to countless others. The lessons learned from Charles and Precious's story resonated far beyond their compound, touching the lives of many and ensuring that their pain was not in vain.